Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest today is Kevin Kennon, an internationally renowned architect with over 40 years of experience specializing in environmentally sustainable and innovative design. And he is the founder and CEO of Beyond Zero DDC Inc. Kevin leads the development of zero carbon emission luxury eco-resorts in remote wilderness locations. But he's also done a variety of work in urban locations, such as the Rodin Museum in Seoul. And he's also worked on the viewing platform, the temporary viewing platform at the World Trade Center. And that's actually something that we dive into in our discussion, in addition to some philosophy, you could say, behind architecture and the role of architecture in urban environments, as well as the future of architecture. There's also a bonus story from me about an architectural decision that I made in my own home with the help of my wonderful wife that you're going to want to check out. Okay, so let's dive right into the interview with Kevin, and I appreciate you listening to Construction Genius today. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Welcome to Construction Genius, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
Your father, Paul, was also an architect. How did growing up with an architect as a parent shape your perspective on architecture personally and professionally?
Well, considering I don't know an alternative, but I think it's more a testament to my father, what kind of a person he was and how enthusiastic he was about architecture, but also I think in general, just life itself. And when you're with somebody who is that positive almost all the time, it's hard not to come out of it with at least an appreciation of what it was. Now, I grew up, of course, questioning a lot about architecture. And I think that's probably a place I still reside. I am constantly examining it from maybe a perspective that a lot of people don't have. And I'm aware of that. There's a certain, I suppose, privilege that comes with being around. I think the privilege is not, again, so much about, well, my father was an architect that made it easier for me to become an architect. I'm sure there are a lot of reasons why that might be true. But I think it's really more, if you're around anybody who has a positive experience in your life, and it's hard not to take that with you. And certainly as we get older, you realize the importance of being around generally people who liked what they're doing. I would say loved what he was doing.
What do you love about architecture?
First of all, I love architecture in terms of what it can do for people. And I've been fortunate in my life too. And not many architects actually can experience this. I mean, you have an appreciation, if you do a house for somebody and you work with them for a while, you can appreciate what it might be from their perspective. But that's a very different thing when you're doing architecture that affects a lot of people that you don't ever meet. And I'm talking from somebody who tends to be at the point of the spear of any project. And so it's so easy, and I've seen many architects do this, get so caught up in being that point that they don't realize the weight they create and all of the people who are involved in any kind of building endeavor. It's more than just a group enterprise. It's a little bit of its own society. And I don't think one of my criticisms of my profession is I think we neglect that way too much. And I certainly may have been guilty of that early in my career. But again, upon reflection, for me, the truest and most gratifying thing I've ever done is when I see other people take ownership for the project, not just clients, but also people who worked on it, all the way up from the top management down to the guy who's carting material to the job site, or woman. And so I think that having an appreciation of what it can do for you, how it can affect you, and learning from those experiences, I think has taught me a great deal about the significance of architecture in people's lives.
You have a bachelor's degree in literature. What does that have to do with architecture, and how did that lead you to the pivot to architecture, if in any way?
It had a lot to me going to a liberal arts college
Yeah.
and being a believer in liberal arts. And, I don't think I went into that I was necessarily assuming I would become an architect. It just manifested itself that way. And I think the thing that really was the pivot for me is that I was able to spend a junior year abroad. In this case, it was going from Western Massachusetts to New York City. And I studied at this place called the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies, which was a kind of think tank of the 70s and 80s, mostly the 70s, I think. And it was founded by Peter Eisenman. And, it was during a time when there wasn't a lot of work. And so the really interesting things in architecture were all being done in areas of theory and research and criticism. And I think that's where I got the bug.
Was there anything about your literary background that's influenced your approach to architectural design and theory?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of literary theory at the time was intersecting with architecture theory.
Can you give me an example of one?
I think there's an interest in certain post-structuralist thought. I was also minored in anthropology, so I think that also overlapped. So there was, I was interested in the intellectual aspects of architecture. But the thing that I learned from my experience at the Institute was how to think of architecture as a discipline, and that there was value in having a rigorous understanding of what it is that you wanted to say. And I mean that in a very broad sense, not just literally what you wanted to say when you're public speaking or you're writing.
No, I know. Yeah.
But in terms of how you wanted to design.
In your mind, what's the difference between good architecture and bad architecture?
I mean, you know it when you see it. Let's in both instances.
So when you say you know it when you see it, someone might, we can think of architecture from the brutalist architecture.
Right.
And I see that and I'm thinking that's not attractive. And I can see something that completely different. And I think, that resonates with me more. So is it more of a subjective thing, or are there objective aspects about architecture that are universal?
Those are really great questions. Let me back up and tell you where I am on all of this is that I think, and this is where maybe the fact that I grew up in Los Angeles in a very woody, hilly, dramatic area, which is literally hanging onto the edge of a cliff almost, and where landscape is so dominant, and then essentially spending the past 40 years in the city. But I've come to appreciate the city as its own kind of landscape. And so I think that for me, that's where it begins and ends, that an appreciation for the landscapes that we create, as well as the appreciation for landscapes that exist, and not taking any of that for granted and trying to learn the lessons that are there. I mean, these are old lessons. This is what connects architecture to all the arts, and certainly it connects it back to human civilization and why it's so critical for the development of that civilization. But beyond that, I think it's also just the way of getting to understand the city in a completely new way. And we're seeing that more and more all over the world, where we're building, I think, less kind of, I guess, what Venturi would call monuments, and really more focus on the ability of cities to exist at multiple levels, multiple elevations, and how that, I think, is really going to continue to play a big role in shaping how we can change architecture to reflect different viewpoints.
Why do you think that is, that we're being less monumental in our approach?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think obviously sustainability has a lot to do with that. But I think it's also just in general, I think I've seen this having taught, places like Yale and Princeton and Columbia, and just the evolution of student work, which is really more and more preoccupied on land and landscape than it is necessarily on making objects. So I'm sort of straddled between both of these areas. And what I am concerned about, there is a tendency to sort of overuse term, greenwash everything.
Yeah.
And you lose I think some of the rigor that we had when we were just concerned with architecture as a kind of a monument,
Tell me what you mean by greenwash.
I mean, greenwash was where you can sort of display your social sustainable credentials, by putting a lot of vegetation on the exterior of your building. I grew up in an era where, that was the joke was that architects who put trees in front of their buildings did so because they didn't like their design. And now it's kind of, we put trees in front of our buildings because we want to showcase that we're green. But I think that's the problem here, is that we're confusing nature with green and vegetation. And it's more than that. It's really about a understanding of the shapes, the temporal aspect of it, the material aspect of it, different ways in which we can appreciate not just the land, but the sky as well.
So would you say that good architecture makes moral statements or ethical statements of some kind?
Gosh, I think that we as a culture tend to imbue architecture with that. I would hesitate to meet the architect who would actually profess to claim that what they're doing is there as a kind of, I don't know, Bible of some kind. If you go back in the history of architecture, there was a time when that was necessary. I think it was Victor Hugo, right, who talked about the architecture of Notre Dame being the place where people would go and read biblical stories, and that was essentially it. And then he famously said the printing press would kill architecture because architecture would cease to speak.
That's not the case, is it?
No. And I think that's, again, where we've gone so astray in terms of, trying to imbue architecture with qualities that may or may not be present. And I also think that the best architecture doesn't try to speak. I think it tries to create the space for people to bring meaning, to find the meaning for themselves, or maybe with a group of people. But in general, that's been my experience.
Interesting. You've worked on a number of projects that are significant, like the Rodin Museum, the Samsung headquarters. You were involved in the World Trade Center competition. Which project has challenged you the most, and how did that influence your architectural perspective?
Well, I guess the one, and this will tie right into what I was just saying, that is probably to this day my favorite endeavor would be the temporary viewing platform at Ground Zero. It was almost the only time in my career that I've ever seen that where there was a kind of a need for architecture in the way that I just described it. It was a need to create some place where people could go and understand and witness a complete catastrophe, human catastrophe, an abomination, really, and make some sort of sense out of it. So that was done very quickly. It was always meant to be a temporary thing. We ended up putting together in a matter of weeks. We raised the money, we designed it, we did the whole thing, and it was a remarkable thing once it was built. I had no idea how it was going to work, but we just did it, and it was put in a really remarkable place. So I think that had a lot to do with it. But you could actually see that if you just created the right place that was respectful of what was going on and allowed people the ability to see for themselves, and take away whatever they needed to take away at that point. That to me is the epitome of what I think architecture can do. And I think we've somehow forgotten that.
As you were designing that structure, what was the debate or the discussions that you were having with people involved in that design in terms of what it was going to look like? And as you look at it, I'm looking at pictures of it right now.
Yeah.
It's not attempting to be anything of itself. It seems like it's there to serve the people. It's not trying to say anything itself.
Yeah.
Was there a temptation there for you to try and say something, or were you just focused on the people whom it was serving?
It was absolutely the latter. I mean, and I was trying to solve a problem for my own self, which was I lived just a few blocks away from Ground Zero, and I was horrified when I went down there the first time at just the pandemonium. And so I was, first of all, trying to think about what I would need, to somehow get some sense of what was going on. And then to understand a little bit about what we could do with the material that we had. I mean, we had to, originally we did it was like $1 million. We couldn't raise $1 million. So we had to cut the budget in half. I ended up spending a great deal of time working with scaffolding companies and trying to figure out what their limitations were and what I wanted to do, which was to at least create some sense of elevation. This was adjacent right next to the St. Paul's Chapel, which behind it was this beautiful cemetery and surrounded by 400-year-old, 300-foot tall elm trees that had been untouched.
Yeah, how do those trees even survive?
I don't know. And same thing with St. Paul's and same thing with the cemetery. There wasn't, I think, a blade of grass that was out of place. And the remarkable thing about it was the effect is that when you went up these sort of gradual ramps to get up to that level and you got out there, it was quiet. It was absolutely, you couldn't hear anything. You couldn't hear the machines going, the people working, the din of the city. It was just all you could hear was literally the trees rustling.
Was that intentional on your part? Did you know that going in, or was that just
No. And I think this is what's interesting is that I think you can, if you follow your instincts, sometimes it actually leads you in a better place. And if you try and, I think architects were guilty about this. We tend to overpromise and underdeliver as a profession, and I've been very careful about that. I don't like to, when I explain something to people, I don't really like to give a overly pedantic musing on it, because I'm much more interested in what people, how they're affected by it and what their stories are. So to me, the greatest things I've done, the most satisfaction I've ever done is to see other people occupy it and see how they respond to something that I've done that, may have just existed as a little sketch on a piece of paper, or maybe a conversation that I had with a colleague.
What's the one thing you would change in your leadership, if at all possible? Would it be better use of your time, running more effective meetings, building and leading a high-performing team, having difficult conversations, communicating more effectively with those whom you lead? Whatever the case is, you should check out my course, The Shift. The Shift is all about how folks who are experts at building projects can make the shift from being a project builder to a people leader. And it's a 5-module online course that's designed specifically to give you actionable strategies and templates that will change the way that you lead. So go out to theshift.constructiongenius.com, link in the show notes, check out all the information about the course. Read some of the testimonials from people who have taken the content from The Shift and used it in their businesses to tremendous benefit. And if you have any questions about it, obviously you can contact me, Eric at constructiongenius.com. All right, let's get back to the interview with Kevin. And it's interesting how when you put in place any physical structure, the nature of it changes based on how people and other physical structures around it relate to it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point. That I think there's a place for sort of autonomous architecture, but I think it's really the meaning of it. It really doesn't make any sense until you put people in the mix. So, but it does come from oddly sort of sometimes very intimate exchanges that you have with other people, and a series of these, and then you see that cascading, and other people adopt their own views and make it better. And that's, to me, one of the best things about being an architect is that you do get to work with people a lot. It's not a solitary activity. It's a highly social one.
It's interesting. I was just thinking about some work that I had done in my house. We were contemplating building an ADU in the backyard.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so, we're all pumped about that.
Yeah.
But then we've reflected on the purpose of the ADU, which was basically to create enough room for our kids in the house, etc. And my wife and her sister had this flash of insight on how to use our den, which we didn't use that much. And we just then converted that into a bedroom. And instead of building the ADU, we just did that. The preamble is because of this. As you're designing and you're in conversation with people,
yeah,
How do you experience those flashes of insight where you say, "Oh, this is going to work"? Because as soon as she came up with that idea, the ADU went right out the window, and I said, "That's exactly what we need to do."
Right. Because I have this all the time. It's really funny, and I do like those moments where it gets better through a process of collaboration.
Right.
And you have to allow yourself to be open to maybe somebody has a better idea than you are. That's usually the case. But
yeah. No, it's true. No, totally.
And if you don't allow space for that, if you don't allow that to be better, it doesn't mean you can't question it. You can't hone it. You can't refine it, because there has to be economy of what you do, because I think just to be responsible, you have to understand what the limitations are. Most of the time you're dealing with other people's money. And so, but I do think that allowing a certain place, not just problem solving, but in that case, that was beyond just problem solving. It was, I'm going to completely rethink this.
Yes.
We're going down this one path, but wait a minute, we got an opportunity right here, and you just have to change your viewpoint. That sounds like what that exchange.
That's exactly what happened. It was really interesting. Yeah. So with that in mind, what are some of the primary challenges architects face when designing for densely populated cities like New York or London?
Well, obviously, again, I'll start with the obvious, which is that I think that you have to be careful of hubris. You have to be, most architects are inveterate travelers, at least that I know. And if you stop and think about it, when most people travel to other cities, they do spend a good deal of time at least looking at architecture. And there's two things that are going on, right? One is imagining what you would do in this particular instance. But if that just becomes, oh, I'm going to do this in this city because I had this idea in this other city and I want to apply it to this city, and that's just going to continue my evolution as me, it's going to create an arc. And, a lot of people, they design their careers in architecture in particular. But I think the reverse of that, and is really what I'd like to call more community-based design, is really just listening to the people who are there and what it is that this, inevitably you're going to come upon some place that somebody has owned before or been before or knew about, and they're going to have their own values and memories and even their own ideas of what should happen there. And it's too often, I think, that we just tend to get either mired in the details. Oh, it's got to have so much FAR and it's got to be this height, and the meeting the client's program, but equally, and understanding the codes and the zoning, and et cetera. But I think we also have a responsibility to decide, do we want to build? Is it better just to take an existing building that's there and not build new, or keep some of it and add on to it? Or, that it used to be that we would, everything was, oh, we got to build new. And I think increasingly we're looking at that differently.
You're known for your interest in the intersection of architecture and pop culture. How do you believe pop culture influences architectural trends, and why is that essential for architects to engage with it?
Well, I mean, I did a lot of retail work, so I think it's fashion, and they were fashion. So fashion and pop culture, obviously, I think that's an easy place for people to make that connection. But I think, today there's obviously, we can look at what the reasons are. Democratization of culture through the internet and social media, and obviously even more so. That creates a sort of a condition where pop culture is ever present in our lives. And obviously there is a trend right now towards more and more experiential design. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think integrating technology and architecture, especially technology that's sensorial, that enhances, your experience of architecture, I think that's all great. I've never sort of been a purist in that sense. I'm not necessarily a populist either, but I do think for the right project, the right time, the right place, why not?
You've been involved in creating zero carbon emission luxury resorts. Give us a little bit more about that. That sounds, almost contradictory, right? Zero carbon luxury.
I know it does. And beyond that, these are not only just meant to be very exclusive resorts, but they're also catalysts for green technology and other kinds of technology involved in buildings and because the point is that, and this is a lesson that has come home to me in a quite a personal way, which is the area that I grew up in outside of Los Angeles. It's on the peninsula of Palos Verdes, but this is an area called Portuguese Bend, and which is today sliding into the ocean at a rate of, I think it's 6 inches per week, or was.
That's pretty
quick. They've been able to drill some wells, and I think that's dealt with some of the subsidence. But when you are so my boyhood home, I grew up kind of slowly sliding into the ocean. Actually, not slowly, it's rather rapidly. I think when you have that sort of experience, it hits home.
Yeah.
What happened, climate change hits home. And I think that's part of the issue is like we now have the technology where we can put this kind of project and use entirely renewable systems to power it. And so it's essentially all off grid. But at the same time, the point is to have people in these rather remote places, but have the ability to sort of experience the power of nature. And, and this is not, there's been a lot of sort of eco resorts out there, and they all kind of follow a very similar model, which is a bunch of sort of little bungalows. And unfortunately, the problem with those types as a hotel proposition is that they're very interesting until you've got to order room service.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I was very young, we lived in South America. We lived in Santiago, Chile, and my first experience going to Machu Picchu was you kind of took this rickety. I don't know if you've ever been to Machu Picchu before.
No, I haven't. No.
But anyway, you take this kind of rickety. At this time, it was not many people were doing this because it was in the early '60s, and they had an old Swiss hotel at the top of this thing, and I remember it as being, oh, this is terrific because we got all these people from all over the world who were kind of staying in this little pristine little Swiss hotel in the middle of the Andes with no trees. It was, and that left a mark on me that, that hotels are actually, should be places, or resorts are places people want to go. They want to go either with their friends or they want to go and meet other people, so that the experiences are really more social oriented, and then as opposed to just getting away. And
what's an example of one of those types of projects that you've worked on?
Well, I'm doing one right now. And so this is kind of where a lot of our thinking is right now. Again, there are not many rooms, but the point is to have 5-star service. And it's not glamping either, and it's not like scattering everything around. It's really keeping everything compact and a very low footprint. But at the same time, there is an element of being right on the edge of the world.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, this is Eric. Quick break to remind you about my book, Construction Genius. Effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice. You might wonder, where did you get that bold subtitle of effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS? I got that from one of my clients who took one of my courses and said, this is Eric's stuff. It's just straight to the point. It's applicable, and it makes a difference in leadership. So go out to Amazon and buy yourself a copy, and buy a copy for everyone in your organization who's in leadership and anyone who aspires to leadership. I promise you it will make a difference. All right, let's get back to the interview with Kevin. With the growing focus on sustainability and green technology, how do you envisage architecture evolving over the next couple of decades?
Well, first of all, I think sustainability is just a fact. I mean, just like you can't build without understanding the codes or understanding something about physics, you can't build without, I mean, I guess you can, but I mean, somebody in my position, I can't imagine that you would completely disregard it. On the other hand, I do think that we've gotten lazy here, and then maybe it's because of the pandemic or whatever, but we've just accepted anything that sort of looks like it's sustainable as being an example of the future of architecture. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that we're going to have to integrate technology. I don't think we're fully prepared for how much technology is going to change our lives here in the next 20 years.
What's it? One example of that?
Well, I just think robots, for example. I mean, it's a friend of mine has started, he's an architect, he started his own robotics company. So I guess I'm maybe more attuned to it than most, but I think they're going to have a profound effect on daily life, and they're going to be integrated. There won't be robots just in sense of, I mean, there will be obviously humanoid type robots,
Sure.
but I think that it's really more, it's just built into our whole systems approach in architecture, and they'll be built into everything, and it'll just be so ubiquitous. It'll just be, we will look back on the days that we had to walk around with these boxes everywhere. That's as antiquated as the old crank up phones.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. So tell us a little bit more about how people can get in touch with you, learn about your work, and even meet up with you on LinkedIn or social media.
Yeah, I mean, well, the easiest way is you can always email me.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, which is kevin@kdcaia.com. There's my website is also kdcaia.com. I'm on LinkedIn. That's usually the best place, or Instagram. But, in general, you could there's not many architects named Kevin Kennon, so you can just Google me and you can get a hold of me that way too. So
that's great. What's the one piece of advice you would give to contractors who want to have a better experience working with the architects they're involved with on projects?
Well, this is something I've been doing a lot of lately. I've been doing some consulting, mainly as on a couple projects. And I think that the days of our design and building that were adversarial, I think those days are over, I hope. First of all, with the technology that we use nowadays, it's very difficult to take on an adversarial position where you really have to be collaborative in order to make things work. I think our legal structure needs an overhaul, frankly. I think there's too many lawyers in what we do, and there's just not enough problem solving that can happen. And the expertise is becoming more and more narrow. So something has to give. Now, AI potentially as a solution out of all this, but I think there's going to have to be a legal overhaul about how we realize projects.
What would be the benefit of that overhaul?
I think the benefit would be you get the best you can out of everybody who's working on the project, which is what the best clients I ever worked with, really about, let's solve the problem. You can spend 2 seconds pointing fingers, but at the end of the day, if you play that game for too long, you end up, it's just a never ending. There's so many issues that come up on a job or a job site. I just find that you can usually sort through just about anything, but you have to have the right attitude on the job. And, at the end of the day, we're people and we have to work together. And if you can't find a way to work professionally, it just shouldn't be in the job itself. So, and I guess that's what I'm hoping is that my best experiences in working have been because I've worked with amazing people who are very, very good at what they do. And they don't tell me what to do, and I generally don't try to tell them what to do. And I think that goes for just about anybody in the whole process. And again, we're talking sometimes thousands of people get involved in doing kinds of buildings that I've been involved with. Fortunate to be able to.
Excellent. Excellent. So Kevin, you're in New York. Give me one restaurant that I need to hit the next time I'm in New York. The impossible question.
Well, I don't know. What kind of food do you like?
I'm easy, man. I'm easy.
You really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the great thing about New York is that it's really just find yourself in the right area. And I live in the West Village, and so there's nothing but great restaurants around here. And here's the amazing thing. There's a restaurant that my girlfriend had been trying to get me to go to forever. And I wouldn't go because he had to stand in line to get seated. And she's like, no, you got to do this. So we finally, there's some friends of ours that we've been dying to have dinner with. And so we finally did it. And it was amazing. It's called Via Carota. And it was a terrific thing to do. The only problem is you have to go in And before they even tell you what time you're going to be sitting, you have to wait in line to give them your name every night. So it's very sort of democratic that way. But I don't know.
So is that via Kuroda, you said?
Yeah, Kuroda. Yeah, like Carrot Way, I think.
Yeah, no, I got it right here. I got it. And it's on Grove Street.
Yeah.
It does look quite delicious.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining us, Kevin. I enjoyed just bantering back and forth about architecture, and make sure we'll have all the links in the show notes so people can reach out and contact you.
So next time I come out there, I'm bunking in your den.
Yeah, right. I know. There you go.
Your ADU.
I'll have to have my boy. I have got 2 of my boys living in there, so they'll have to clean the room. But it's totally awesome, and it's weird because it's so funny that you say that, because when you come into the house, it's like it's always been there. It just fit perfectly. And it was just an amazing thing.
That's good. That's good. I wish all my clients would say the same thing to me.
No, it's beautiful.
But tell your wife that she had a great idea.
No, it's awesome. I tell her that all the time.
Yeah, that's why you're still married.
Right on.
So anyway, listen, Eric, it was terrific to speak with you. I hope we get the chance to, and let me know when you're in New York.
That'd be great. I will. I'll let you know when I'm in New York. I'll need someone to show me around, because I'm a bit of a country bumpkin when it comes to the large cities.
It's not that difficult. And I can take you to places in the city that won't feel like the city at all.
That's awesome. I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you.
Great.
Hey, thank you for listening to my interview here today with Kevin. And if you enjoyed it, share it with other people. Feel free to check out the show notes for how you can connect with Kevin. And if you're in New York, I think that restaurant that he recommended would be something to go check out as well. And thank you for listening to Construction Genius. Please give the show a rating or review, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.